Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Norbella Miranda, professor of the emphasis of ELT education, and I have the honor of hosting this dissertation defense. Defending a dissertation represents a key moment on the path toward earning a doctoral degree. It is the opportunity to share the results of years of dedication, research, and intellectual growth. This dissertation defense is one of the requirements for obtaining the doctoral title in our program. Today, the doctoral candidate, Alexander Ramírez, will present his dissertation entitled Intercultural Communicative Competence across the curriculum of the Foreign Languages Teacher Education Program at Univalle, a proposal for its development and assessment. This dissertation has been supervised by Dr. José Aldemar Álvarez, Valencia, from Universidad del Valle. This is the agenda for this oral defense. Number 1, brief introduction of the session. 2, presentation of the jury members. 3, presentation of the dissertation by the doctoral candidate, who will have 30 minutes to present his work. 4th, round of comments and questions from the jury members and responses from the candidate. 5, private deliberation of the jury to reach a decision. And during this time, the candidate, his dissertation advisor, and the other participants will remain in this room where they may ask questions, make comments to Alexander. 6, return of the jury to the room and announcement of the final decision. 7, comments by the dissertation advisor. And 8, official closing of the session. So let's begin. First, I would like to express my gratitude to the jury members, Dr. María Eugenia Guapacha, Universidad del Valle, Dr. Beatriz Peña-Dix, Universidad de los Andes, and Dr. Anthony Liddicoat, University of Warwick. A special thank you also goes to the dissertation advisor, Dr. José Aldemar Álvarez. We greatly value your contributions and commitment to the program. The jury members have already had the opportunity to read, evaluate, and provide feedback on the dissertation. Today, they will listen to the presentation of the doctoral candidate, ask questions about aspects they consider relevant, and assess how the candidate has incorporated their recommendations. So let's move now to the second point of the agenda, which is the brief biodata of the members of the jury. María Eugenia Guapacha Chamorro, who is here with us, is Associate Professor of Applied Linguistics at Universidad del Valle in Colombia. Her research efforts have focused on language assessment, writing assessment, EFL writing, and language teachers' professional development. Beatriz Peña-Dix, José PhD in education with emphasis in interculturality and intercultural education from the University of Durham, UK. She is an associate professor in the Department of Languages and Cultures at Universidad de los Andes. Her research of interest include language teaching pedagogies, bilingualism, interculturality, and the development of intercultural competence. Anthony Liddicoat, whose educational background is in descriptive and in applied linguistics, completed his PhD in Northern French dialects in the Department of French at the University of Melbourne. His research spans a number of areas of applied linguistics, including language education, language policy and planning, and discourse analysis. However, much of his work has focused on the relationship between intercultural understanding and language teaching and learning, and he's currently a professor in the Department of Applied Linguistics at the University of Warwick. So let's move now to the defense of the research proposal. We will ask Alexander to deliver a 30-minute presentation of his dissertation. I will be keeping track of the time and will raise my hand 5 minutes before his allotted time is up. Alexander, you will hear a sound when I do so. And once the time has ended, I will let you know. Okay, so we are all ready to listen to Alexander.
Okay, can you hear me?
Perfect, yes.
All right. So, good morning, everyone, and allow me just to enlarge the screen. So, good morning. And before I begin, I want to sincerely thank Dr. Aldemar Álvarez, who directed this dissertation. Thank you, Dr. Aldemar, for your generous guidance throughout the process. And I also want to extend my gratitude to the members of my committee, Drs. Liddicoat, Dr. Peña-Dix, Dr. Guapacha, and many thanks to my friends and my colleagues who have connected to this online session, because it is truly comforting to count on your support and see your little faces on the screen. So my dissertation is titled Intercultural Communicative Competence Across the Curriculum of the Foreign Language Teacher Education Program at Univalle, a proposal for its development and assessment. And just a small note here, the pictures that you will be seeing in this presentation all come from different moments of campus life at our university. So I'd like to start by showing you the research problem that underpins my study. This is a problem that connects directly with three local antecedents developed at the School of Language Sciences in Univalle. And in these three studies by Patiño, Faustino, and others, it became evident that despite a genuine interest that we have in ICC and a strong academic advancement in ICC in relation to foreign language teacher education, we still have a mismatch between official documents and classroom practices. We have lack of methodological guidelines for ICC, and we have a pressing need to redesign the undergraduate curriculum in such a way that ICC is not only valued in theory, but is actually systematically embedded across the coursework. So this local problem is also showing you that this local problem that we have at the School of Language Sciences is also framed within national and international issues. So in Colombia, for example, we have the Ministry of Education that has issued policies that explicitly call for intercultural curricula. And even though we have local scholarship that has explored ICC in connection to technology, teaching materials, teacher beliefs, all of these studies consistently conclude that there is a lack of planning and fostering and assessment of ICC in teacher education. And if we move to the international stage, we now we see that, okay, intercultural communicative competence is central to education and to foreign language teaching. And despite a myriad of studies in relation to literature, teacher training, immersion programs, authentic materials, we don't often get to see how ICC can be systematically integrated into the whole curriculum of foreign language teacher education programs. So in my literature review, I found three main gaps. The first one at the international stage is that we see that despite there's a rich and growing body of scholarship addressing many aspects of ICC, most of those initiatives remain isolated classroom strategies. They are often led by individual teachers, and there are no comprehensive curricular frameworks for integrating ICC across an entire curriculum. At the national level, the literature shows that research has largely focused on teachers and students' perceptions mainly, and also on small-scale pedagogical efforts, and usually taking place within the classroom. But those studies have not yet translated into program-wide institutional models. So we can see that culture is still acknowledged as essential, but in reality, linguistic and communicative aspects continue to take precedence in the language classroom. And the third gap is assessment. So you know that assessment remains one of the most unexplored dimensions of intercultural communicative competence. And although there are different international studies that explore ICC assessment, in Colombia, I only found one recent study, which is that of by Monsalve. And in this study, we see how two teachers assess ICC development at a university. And something that stands out from this study is that we still lack a clear understanding of what assessment really means in this field, and that we need to move beyond purely quantitative paradigms. So my dissertation responds to these gaps by proposing the construction of a collaborative, context-sensitive in-house model that would allow teacher educators to integrate and assess ICC systematically in our program. With this in mind, my literature review focused on 4 pillars that sustain the study. So first, we have the construct of intercultural communicative competence, and it was grounded in the definitions and models of the most influential scholars in the field. Second, we have curriculum. So here what I did is that I utilized different authors that advocate for democratic processes of curriculum design and for an approach in which culture and ICC are at the core of language teaching and not just as a separate content or as a separate skill. Third, we have the construct of assessment, which is closely related to curriculum. And the authors that I chose here put forward the idea that something as personal and as ethereal as ICC implies the development of multi-perspective approaches and context-based approaches. And finally, I have the construct of professional learning, which has to do with a democratic form of professional development in which the members of the same community study and learn together for the benefit of a program, a student body, a curriculum, and so on, okay? So against this backdrop, I came up with the main research question, which was, how can an in-house model for the development and assessment of ICC be planned across the curriculum of a foreign language teacher education program? And so I subsequently developed these 4 subsidiary questions. The first one being, what are the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for the development of ICC in the curriculum of the foreign language teacher education program at Univalle? So here it's like a stage 4 context assessment. My second question was, what is the impact, if any, of a professional learning program on the achievement of an intercultural orientation? The third question was, what are the dimensions of ICC that language educators deem necessary to include in an ICC in-house model, and how they characterize those dimensions? So basically here, what I wanted to do was to, to determine the scope and the sequence of the dimensions that the teacher educators deem necessary across the curriculum. And finally, I have my 4th question, which is, how do the program's professors foster the development of ICC in their classroom after the design of this in-house model? So basically the objective here was to assess the impact of this implementation. So let me now turn to the research design of this study. I conducted a qualitative case study, and I chose this design because in a case study, the aim is a deep-situated understanding of a specific phenomenon. Now, a few words about the context. So the foreign language teacher education program belongs to the School of Language Sciences at Universidad del Valle, and this is the largest state-funded university in Southwest Colombia. The program is a 10-semester program, and it's a program that serves around 450 students, and it is characterized by a strong cultural ethnic diversity. We have a faculty that supports the program that includes 38 teacher educators. And so finally, let me highlight that the participants in this study were 27 teachers, 27 teacher educators who took part of the study, and this is about 68% of the complete faculty. Now, this case study was developed in 4 progressive stages, and I will break down each stage in a minute. And data were collected by means of documentary analysis, interviews, recordings of different sessions from a professional learning program, video recordings, class observations, and my personal research journal. And then for the analysis, I chose reflective thematic analysis as proposed by Brown and Clark in 2024, right? So research stage 1 was all about context assessment. And here I intended to answer subsidiary research question 1. And the goal here was to identify strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for developing ICC across our curriculum. And so to do this, I combined two main strategies. So first, I conducted a documentary analysis, and I reviewed 53 official documents that included the program's educational project. I included some self-assessment reports written by the program, and all coursework syllabi. And second, I carried out semi-structured interviews with teacher educators. So in total, 12 participants took part here. And I would say that this stage laid the foundation for understanding the curricular landscape and to identify where ICC could realistically be strengthened, not only in theory, but also in practice. Now, in terms of the findings from this first stage, participants highlighted several strengths, such as, for example, that interculturality is well positioned. It is regarded positively in participants' discourses and in the institutional documents as well. In fact, the faculty showed a more critical and more decolonial understanding of both culture and interculturality compared to earlier antecedents, in which there were more traditional views that equated culture simply with nationality, for instance. They pointed to a solid curricular structure. They feel that the program is supported by accreditation processes. They feel that the faculty is qualified, is deeply committed to the program. And they also saw students and teachers' diversity as an important asset for curricular innovation. In terms of weaknesses, I can mention that participants identify some curricular rigidities, such as, for example, the fact that we have a subject-based curriculum, and this might limit some transversal proposals. There was also a lack of shared theoretical definitions and objectives regarding interculturality, and participants mainly complained about limited methodological guidance and few collaborative spaces for curricular design. But at the same time, the participants recognize some important opportunities, such as the ongoing curricular reform that is mandated by the Ministry of Education. So they consider that this is a timely space for decision-making in terms of curriculum. And they also mentioned the social context as a source of diversity. And by social context, they were meaning the campus, the city, and the country. So they feel that these are changing social political landscapes with many aspects like migration, social movements at the forefront. And participants feel that all of this can be harnessed in favor of intercultural dialogue. And so to respond to these challenges, they also propose to build on the strengths and to design some professional development initiatives that would allow them to collaborate in curricular design and perhaps promote spaces for sharing, strategies for teaching and for assessment. So this brings us to the second stage of the research process, which was devoted to the design of the professional learning program. And here, the purpose was to utilize the results from the previous stage in favor of designing this intervention that would hopefully allow us to construct the intercultural orientation. So I designed 7 in-person workshops. And for this design, I followed the framework proposed by Timperley and colleagues. These 7 sessions, each of them lasted about 3 hours and a half, and we spread them across one semester, and participation was voluntary. Now, something important here is that the topics came directly from what the participants expressed in stage 1. So this ensured somehow that the program was not something abstract, but it was actually responsive to the teachers' needs and what they had proposed. And even some of the professors, some of the participants who had prior research experience with ICC volunteered to help lead some of the sessions. We now move on to research stage 3. So here, I devoted this session to the implementation of the professional learning program. So we carried out the 7 sessions, and 22 teacher educators took part. Each session was recorded, transcribed, and analyzed, and I also kept a research journal for data collection. And in this stage, my objective was to answer research question 2 and research question 3. So about the impact and about the dimensions that they considered necessary. So let's talk about research question 2 and the impact of this professional learning program. I would say that the program played a key role in addressing some of the curricular's main weaknesses that had been identified at the beginning. So one of the most remarkable changes has to do with the fact that we move from a culture of individual work to one of collaborative engagement. So as you can see in some of the comments on the screen, you can see how participants express this movement. Another important outcome was that the exposure to diverse perspectives opened the door to interdisciplinary collaboration. So we got to challenge, traditional subject-based structures of curriculum. And a relevant impact also has to do with the fact that the faculty negotiated some foundational definitions and definitions of key concepts such as culture and interculturality. And these definitions served as the basis for what I consider perhaps the biggest takeaway from this experience, which is the design of the ARKS in-house model, which I will show you in a minute. So in general terms, I would say that this professional learning program contributed to the theoretical refinement of the program's curriculum, and at the same time, it fostered an inclusive and a democratic environment where participants were treated as co-constructors of curricular knowledge. So this is the ARKS in-house model for ICC development, and ARKS stands for attitudes, reflection, knowledge, and skills as the dimensions that participants selected as the ones we need to develop in our curriculum. And something important here is that to come up with this model, participants first co-constructed 3 models that represented how they understood the intertwining of ICC and the curriculum. And so what I did is that I helped them consolidate all their visual metaphors and principles into one single model that ended up being this ARKS in-house model. So let me briefly explain the model. So we use the metaphor of water to represent that cultures are plural, dynamic, cultures are interconnected. So if you follow this metaphor, just like water, cultures are fluid, they are in constant motion, they overlap, they mix, they evolve, and it is hard to draw clear boundaries between one body of water and another that collide. And just as cultures, water also exists in different forms. So we have rivers, we have oceans, we have glaciers, we even have vapor. And there is also the notion of depth. So cultures have both a visible surface level and deeper layers that require careful exploration, just as waters. Now, in this model, the curriculum is represented by a tank, and this water tank is on top of a scaffolding. And so the tanks collects the water, meaning that it's kind of like we harness the cultures that the students and the teachers bring to the table, and we regulate the flow of cultural resources, just as curriculum organizes perspective, practices, knowledge, subjects. So this represents how we leverage culture in favor of the students in the social realities of our context. Now, this water here from this tank flows through a faucet, and it flows into the water mill. And now the faucet represents all those strategies that we carefully design. So the drops symbolize, activities, the documents, the syllabi, the practices that nurture intercultural competence in the program. And the mill only moves if the flow is constant. Okay, so this reminds us that ICC requires sustained, intentional learning experiences. Now, the mill itself represents a continuous development of intercultural competence with the students, ICC at the center, and the buckets are all the dimensions of ICC. Now, none of these elements can work in isolation, but they are actually all essential for movement. And finally, once the water completes the cycle in the model, it flows back into the larger body of water. But we believe that it doesn't return the same, so it actually comes back transformed. And this represents how students take what the curriculum gives them and apply it outside the classroom in their social interactions. So hopefully they will act as intercultural mediators, and they have been enriched by their experiences in the curriculum. And so this is also a metaphor that the learning, continues beyond the program. So intercultural competence is not a final product, but actually an ongoing lifelong process. Now, together with this graphic, participants also designed a series of 41 guidelines that were there to operationalize each of the 4 dimensions. And they also worked on the distribution of these guidelines across the coursework in a way that each guideline would match the objectives kind of like the general emphasis of each semester. So here you can see a sample of the first 2 semesters. One of the key aspects of this framework is that the guidelines are designed to be flexible rather than prescriptive, if I may. And so each semester includes a set of suggested guidelines. So at least 2 or 1 from each dimension. So here are the dimensions. And then here we have, like suggested, the suggested guidelines. But it is up to professors to choose the ones that best fit their course and objectives and themes. So for example, in the first semester, if, for example, a professor from Introduction to Language Studies selects a descriptor, selects a guideline from the reflection dimension, and then the teacher from Integrated Skills in English 1 selects 2 of the knowledge dimension, over time, as other professors make their own selection, all the guidelines are going to be gradually addressed, okay? But even if some of them are skipped in a given semester, they will appear again in later semesters. So this ensures that students revisit each dimension many times through the program. And something that we wanted with this distribution was to emphasize the idea that first, ICC development is not linear. And second, that it doesn't depend on language proficiency alone. So from the very beginning in the program, you can address some intercultural guidelines, even if language proficiency is not that high yet. So this brings us to the last stage, in which my question was how participants foster ICC in their classrooms after applying the model. And in this stage, I observed 7 professors, and in total, I did 21 observations during one semester, in which I looked closely at the topics, the activities, the materials that they would use in class. And what stood out clearly was an emphasis on the knowledge and the skills dimension, while the knowledge and reflection dimension, while the skill dimension and the attitudes dimension were less, let's say, they were less developed, or at least they receive less attention. And the way I interpret this is that professors may be intentionally prioritizing awareness and knowledge building or critical thinking before moving into more action-oriented dimensions. Regarding the activities, what I found was that there's a rich variety of creative strategies. So, for example, professors used fact-checking world news, analyzing social media videos, organizing original cultural festivals, developing teaching units to explore intercultural aspects with children. And I saw 2 clear patterns in these activities. So first is that most participants relied on Liddicoat and Scherino's interacting processes as a framework to structure the activities. And second is that they often began with the surface level cultural elements, so things like food, festivals, or traditions, and they would use them as entry points before guiding the students into deeper reflection. And so when we map this kind of activities onto the Liddicoat and Scherinus model, there's a clear progression that emerges. So most classes moved from noticing surface level features into comparing and into reflecting, and perhaps the process of interacting was the less developed. And I would say that, yeah, students were very successful in discussing and reflecting within the classroom, but perhaps we still need to take these reflections outside the classroom, because especially, because the participants themselves had expressed since the beginning of the study a strong interest in connecting local realities and campus diversity in the wider city as spaces for intercultural practice. Another important aspect that I found here was the use of plurilingual practices. So they play central role in promoting respect for linguistic diversity. I feel that this supports the colonial approaches as well, and it recognizes the students' local and personal identities. And finally, regarding some assessment practices, I have to say that perhaps because this is the very first time that participants have been using the model in their courses, assessment is still very much an open question. For some of them, it was actually an uncomfortable topic. They argue strongly for self-assessment as the most authentic approach, and they emphasize that because the intercultural development is personal, then traditional grading might risk reducing all the complexity into just labels or checklists. So they design different types of strategies, like collecting spontaneous observations of cultural outbursts in the classroom, reflection journals, and so on and so forth. And if you put all of these strategies together, what this reveals is that professors are starting to share an understanding that assessment must operate in two different levels. So on the one hand, there's students who engage in continuous self-assessment, so they kind of gain the tools to reflect and self-regulate. And on the other hand, the program itself collects voluntary or anonymous input, not to grade the individuals, but to understand how well the curriculum is creating meaningful opportunities for the students. So let me finish with some discussions of the key outcomes of this research. First, regarding the professional learning as a catalyst for intercultural curriculum design, I have to say that this initiative actually created a bridge between the aspirations of intercultural education that we had and the kind of learning that we actually needed to make it happen. We got to build a learning community inside our institution, and the teachers worked together. We shared needs, we shared different goals, and they were all treated, I mean, my participants were all treated not as passive implementers of an external model, but actually as knowledge producers and co-designers of the curriculum. And something important that I want to mention here is the dynamics within this professional learning program actually reflected the very intercultural competence that we want to develop with our pre-service teachers, because the workshops became a laboratory of intercultural practice. These were spaces where participants challenged assumptions, they negotiated differences, they co-constructed shared visions for the future of the program. And this brings me to the second finding, and it's the role of definitions and context, the role that these have in shaping an intercultural curriculum. So one of the very first challenges that we faced was conceptual ambiguity. So what exactly do we mean by culture? What exactly do we mean by interculturality or assessment? And so even if revisiting these definitions may seem redundant, for us, it turned out to be crucial, because the way we define these constructs have a direct influence in how we design curricula. And so I feel that the program allowed us to embrace broader and more critical understandings, and we recognize culture not as a fixed or national element, but actually as something fluid, situated, and constantly negotiated. So this shift allowed us to ground curriculum in our specific institution and in our Colombian context. In short, the findings suggest that intercultural curriculum design must always start with two things. So there's the collective negotiation of definitions of key constructs and the grounding of those definitions in the specific historical, social, and political context of the program. And finally, one of the most important findings of this research is a strong emphasis placed on the self and the local as key resources for intercultural curriculum design. Because from the very first stage of the study, participants recognized that the diversity present in the program itself was both a strength and a strategic opportunity for developing intercultural capabilities. And this translated into the ARKS prioritizing diversity, starting with reflection on the self and then extending to reflection on the classroom, the university, the city, and so on and so forth. And finally, okay, let me talk about plurilingual practices. This was also nice to find because they acknowledge diversity. They empower learners also as co-constructors of meaning in the classroom. Finally, I would like to mention something about the most challenging aspect of curriculum design in teacher education, that was assessment. So the truth is that traditional models are simply too rigid to capture something as personal and as lifelong as intercultural learning. So what we found in this study is that the faculty began to reimagine assessment in two complementary ways. So at the curricular level, assessment is seen less as grading outcomes, but more as asking, does the program provide enough opportunities for students to engage with interculturality? And so, in other words, the focus was whether on the curriculum itself fosters reflection in intercultural encounters. And second, at the individual level, assessment moved away from testing performance towards self-assessment. So strategies like, engaging with literature, having dialogical discussions, reflecting questions, allow students to examine their assumptions and to monitor their own growth. And this, of course, changes the teacher's role, because instead of being an evaluator, the teacher becomes more a facilitator of reflection, who guides students through a process of discovery. So yeah, I would finish by saying that the study suggests self-assessment is not only practical, but it's also an ethical response to the limitations of traditional evaluation. And with this, I want to thank you for your attention. I will be more than happy to answer your questions and engage in discussion with the members of my committee. Some of the references I used through the presentation, and I hope I can go back to them in a minute. And let me look for you because I don't get to see you.
Okay, thank you, Alexander, for your presentation. Thank you very much. Now the jury members may ask questions or share comments. We will begin with the international jury member, Dr. Anthony Liddicoat, followed by the national jury member, Dr. Beatriz Peña-Dix. Finally, the program's representative jury member, Dr. María Eugenia Guapacha. So, Dr. Anthony Liddicoat, we are all ears.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Alexander, for the presentation and especially for the study, the thesis. I think I said when we were discussing the proposal that it was a very ambitious project. And it was so nice to see that ambition realized in such a substantive piece of work. So congratulations on doing a PhD of that particular scale.
Thank you, Dr. Liddicoat.
I've got quite a lot of questions for you. The more questions that grow out of my interest in your work, they're not trying to understand bits and pieces of the work so much, but trying to think a little bit more broadly about that. And my first question is sort of answered in a way in your thesis, but I'd like a shorter answer, if you like, than the very many pages of the thesis. And it's really, what do you think the major needs of participants in a PhD program like this actually are. And this is growing out of an interest about whether or not all of the participants had similar needs, or whether there was a diversity of needs. And if there was a diversity of needs, how did you actually manage that diversity?
Okay, yeah, I think that definitely there was a diversity of needs, because I would say that my participants approach the intercultural depending also on their academic backgrounds. So some of them had been perhaps more familiar with the intercultural approach. Others just they really wanted to implement this, but they hadn't explored it, and they didn't feel confident as to ask someone, hey, let's do it together. Let's work together. I want to learn from you. So I feel that, yeah, the needs were very different. I could see this in some of the classes that I observed, because, for example, in one of the classes, there was this participant, Acapana, and she would be like very witty in turning a picture into a teaching material. But it was because of her experience that she was able to introduce just the picture and to develop a whole class with an intercultural approach. Whereas we had another participant, I don't remember if it was Ilari, or there was another participant who had a lot of opportunities in the class to develop intercultural discussions, and this person just hadn't developed the expertise to harness and to make the most of those moments. So yes, some people might need more theory, some others might need more practice, some others might need more ideas into how to turn their visions into materials. And for that reason, the professional learning program was actually like a good strategy, because it became a space for sharing. And so I feel that it is very difficult to actually tackle the needs individually, and perhaps to design PLP sessions that would address these individual needs. But at least if we create the process of co-collaboration, then people are going to start to share, and they will identify it. I mean, whose strength is my weakness, and how can I share, and how can I collaborate in order to scaffold my own needs. So yeah, that's what I could say so far.
That raises another question for me, and this is beyond the scope of your thesis entirely, and is this professional development continuing beyond your project, or was it
Yes.
something that happened in the project and has now sort of gone away?
Yeah, yeah, definitely this has to go on, because the intercultural approach is not something that I came up with, but it's actually something that we have been needing for so much time. I mean, like all of our studies, all of our local studies at the School of Language Science shows that we are really invested in this. So for the very first time, we have this space of collaborative curriculum design. And so what I plan to do is to take back these results to my participants and to encourage them to continue furthering this approach. And I would say that one of the good things about the professional learning program, maybe if at some moment I can return to the model that I used by Timperley, one of the elements that we took into consideration was the reality of our context. So for example, the reality meaning that I didn't come up with a professional program that would represent more workload, but we would actually harness already existing spaces within the program, such as, for example, area meetings, English and French area meetings. And so somehow, because these spaces already existed and now we were harnessing in favor of interculturality, this would allow us to continue in time, because this is not something new that we created. This already makes part of the ongoing strategies that we have in the faculty. So yes,
Okay.
yeah, hopefully we will continue.
Yeah, I mean, it's the inevitable problem, I think, with things like this. When there is a person who's enthusiastic in leading the project, it happens. And when that person is no longer doing the same sorts of things, then the energy dissipates. So it will be
Yes.
very interesting to see how this goes on, because your thesis has shown very clearly that there are ongoing needs, especially around assessment and so on. So yeah, it would be wonderful to talk to you in a few years' time and see what the next few years holds in relation to this project.
Yes, absolutely.
My next question sort of follows on from this. And it's that in chapter 5, you talk a lot about some key dissonances that emerged in the professional development sessions and discussions. I'd like you to tell me a little bit more about those dissonances, and in particular, how you in the professional development activity dealt with that sort of dissonance.
Yeah, perhaps one of the first dissonances was in terms of theoretical concepts, because as I said at the beginning, the participants would approach definitions of the cultural and the intercultural based on their backgrounds and based on their studies. So perhaps some of them were more inclined to psychology, some others were more inclined to applied linguistics, and of course that took a toll in the way they would perceive the concepts. And so there were some interesting discussions between the participants who would say, for example, no, I definitely stand on my point that the cultural has to be equated to nationality. And then another person would say, no, okay, but it can be related to nationality, but not only and exclusively to nationality. So it was this negotiation that I compared to the kind of intercultural dialogue that we want to have in other, perhaps in other contexts or in other areas of our life. But I would say that the dissonance had to do with negotiating those theoretical territories that people wouldn't let go so easily. It is actually difficult, because we are treating with seasoned scholars, people who have devoted their whole lives to building, let's say, a theoretical framework. And sometimes it is difficult or uncomfortable to open space for new, let's say, new authors, new visions. So yeah, those were the main tensions that I found.
Okay, thank you for that. My next issue then is that you worked very much at a conceptual level in the work you were doing, and I think that's a very great strength of what you were doing. But the problem with working at a conceptual level is then moving that into curriculum, and moving concepts into curricula is often very complex. So what sort of challenges did your participants have in turning those definitions you worked with into curriculum?
I think that one of the challenges was actually developing methodological strategies. So in one of the sessions, for example, we designed lesson plans. That was part of the session's objective. Now that we have discussed the theory, now that we have come to an agreement of what interculturality means for us and for our curriculum, let's design some classes or some teaching units based on these conceptualizations. And so I didn't get to show you in the dissertation the analysis that I had, but I would say that most of the participants were very prompt in emphasizing the communicative aspect of language teaching. Or some others were very inclined to, again, include the intercultural as just one piece of content or one little session between or among the other sections of of the lesson plan. So it was actually difficult to see the intercultural as something that permeates the whole design. That was one of the challenges. The other challenge was when they were creating the guidelines to operationalize each dimension. It was very difficult for some of them to come to an agreement as to what should we put in reflection and what should we put in, for example, attitudes, or what is an attitude and what is a behavior. So it's an attitude part of the skills dimension, or is an attitude only only within the skills dimension when it turns into a behavior that I can observe, or is an attitude only something that happens at the psychological level? That was very difficult for all of us, I guess. So making decisions in that term was also revealing, because somehow it shows us what we need to strengthen in our model.
Yeah, this issue of the sort of diversity of individuals' practices, I think, is a really interesting one. And one of the things that I was thinking about when I was reading is that you've got 41 descriptors that are used to operationalize this in-house model, and that people make a selection from among those. So this raises a question for me about how that selectivity affected the developmental aspect of the model. You sort of mentioned this a little bit in the presentation, because things returned. But if things hadn't been done the first time, they don't really return when they come back at a later year. So I'm just thinking, how do you think the selectivity affects the developmental focus of the model? And what sort of work did you do as a department to ensure that everything in the model was covered at some point?
That's an interesting question, because it gets me back to those challenges that we had to solve in order to distribute all these guidelines. So first, something that we wanted to avoid was to just have a list of guidelines and say, okay, in the first semester you have to go from 1 to 5, and in second semester you have to go from 6 to 10, for example. We wanted to avoid that, because that would give an idea that the intercultural is something that happens in a linear way. So for that reason, what we did is that participants designed the guidelines, and what I did is that I helped them distribute some of the guidelines. So I would make recommendations. So I would, for example, take all the subjects from the first semester, and I would say, okay, based on these subjects, based on the descriptors of the syllabi, and based on the general focus that this semester proposes for the training of teachers, I would recommend these set of guidelines. But you are free to use them, or you are free to select other ones. Perhaps you have a variation in your syllabi. So yeah, I mean, like, take into consideration this selection that I made, but you can also choose others from the list. And then the second step was that I made sure that each guideline, like all of the guidelines, were in at least one semester, but all of the guidelines were at least 3 times through the whole coursework, in a way that even if you selected some of the guidelines, but perhaps you forgot or you didn't like, well, it might be your personal case, but over time, at least one of the professors in one of the courses will address that specific guideline. And this was done in that way because we believe that part of the assessment we need to do as a department is to make sure that we offer enough of opportunities for our students to develop these intercultural skills. So that couldn't be tackled if we only put one guideline only once during one semester. So we wanted to cover that. How does that affect the design? I think we will have to see, like perhaps after a year or two, because I do think that at the end of the day, we tend to be more inclined to some of the dimensions and not others. But I think that it's over time that we will realize whether we have favored some guidelines and some dimensions and we have neglected others. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with that, because that would allow us to make adjustment to the model. So this is also a way in which I want to ensure the continuity of this research.
Alexander, you make it sound like another long-term research project.
Yes, yeah.
I've got just a couple more questions for you. My next question really relates to the focus of your study. You've written a thesis that's very much about Univalle and Colombia, and you argue very well for why that contextualization is very important. But I'd like you to hear your reflections on what you think your study actually contributes to the international field of teacher education for intercultural language teaching, and what you think people outside Univalle and Colombia might find particularly interesting or powerful in the research that you've done.
I think that's I would say it's a tricky question, because this speaks about the transferability, if I may, of my work. And I would say that even if the results are profoundly grounded in this particular context that is Univalle, and in fact, I wouldn't recommend the use of the ARKS model for no university other than Univalle, because this is a model that speaks to us. It may that is valid for us and for our assets and for our context and for our needs. So I wouldn't recommend using the model as such, but what I do recommend and what I do think that can be transferred is the methodology that we follow to get to the model. This might be interesting for other universities, because and I say this in one of the chapters of my dissertation. I say that interculturality should look different in every context, because every context has particularities in every person who needs to develop interculturality or intercultural capabilities have very personal and individual set of needs. But if we take a look at the methodology, for example, we find that the creation of a learning community around basic concepts and going over basic concepts that have been largely studied in research, I think that having these spaces of reaching consensus about theory, about our practices, and then building, kind of like an approach where everybody can participate democratically in curriculum construction. I think that is a process that might look interesting for other universities, and that might be transferable, and that could yield some results that are coherent for their contexts. So yeah, this is what I can say so far.
Yeah, I strongly encourage you to continue thinking about that, because your study is very different from what exists in the literature so far. And I think an international audience has things to learn from here, and that some publications directed towards that international audience could be very powerful in shaping what's happening in teacher education. So I really recommend that you think some more about that and think about where you might be able to contribute to a more international discussion. I think you've made a strong contribution to the local and even national discussion with the work as you've done it. But I think there's much more that people could learn, that looking at it from an international perspective. And as I'm here as the international person, it's sort of the perspective through which I'm looking at your work. And I think there's a lot of power in that you could unleash in some publications.
Thank you, Dr. Liddicoat. Thank you so much.
My very final question is a question I love to ask students, and I think sometimes they worry about the answer. But my question is, having been through this particular process as a researcher and a participant what would you have liked to have known at the beginning that you didn't know then but do know now? So what have you learned basically through this experience?
Okay, well, I have learned a lot of things, but something that I would have loved to know from the beginning, perhaps, is that okay, I would have done, perhaps I would have done this so much before. I didn't think that it was going to be easy to gather a group of colleagues around learning together. So at the beginning, when I started with the interviews and we started discussing, okay, what do you think are the strengths and the weaknesses that we have? All of the people at an individual level, all of my participants would say, you know what, I really want to learn about this. I really want to learn with my colleagues, but I just don't feel like talking to them. There was Sumak, one of my participants, who shared her insights with me, and she would say, sometimes we have this mask of the university professor, and that mask is so heavy that it doesn't allow me to have the academic humility to approach a colleague and say, hey, I want to learn with you. So when I learned that people were very prompt to work together, if someone would take the lead, I would have done this so much time before. Because when we started, and I didn't want to, at the time, I didn't want to be seen as, you know, the expert or something that wants to teach us something, but I actually wanted to contribute to a more collaborative space for joint learning and joint construction. And when that started happening, and it started happening easily, and people would come, you know, they would actually attend the workshops voluntarily. I said, I never imagined that all that we needed was just a little pushing, and someone to take the lead for people to embark on this type of initiatives.
Okay, well, thank you, Alexander. I could talk to you for a very long time about this work because, as I said, I very much enjoyed learning about it and reading about it. But I know my colleagues are equally passionate about talking to you, so it's time to hand over.
Thank you, Dr. Liddicoat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony Liddicoat, jury, for your questions and comments. And now we will welcome Dr. Beatriz Peña-Dix from Universidad de los Andes as the national jury member.
Thank you. Thank you all. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, I can.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so Alex, first of all, huge congratulations. I was very fortunate that I knew the project, from earlier in different moments at different times. I saw your different presentations in different settings. And I am so fortunate to see the evolution of the whole project. So congratulations. I really enjoyed reading and reflecting on your work. One of the first issues that came to mind when I was reading your work was like the many different roles you played during the research process. Okay, so and then when I got to the part of your paper of your dissertation discussing about your positionality, and I think that you read some of my comments about that. You described yourself as an insider, right? Mm-hmm. That you were an insider because you were an alumnus, a teacher, a researcher, a designer, and you did so many different things inside. And I asked you a question, so I would like you to take that a little further today. If that insiderness that you were discussing in your dissertation itself, because I could feel that it was like a struggle also inside that insiderness. Was that insiderness or the fact of being an insider for you like a kind of intercultural encounter with your own multiple identities you played inside this research? And maybe to complement on the question, it would be like, how did you negotiate the power dynamics here, right? Like between being a colleague, being an evaluator of colleagues, being an observer, being a researcher, an alumnus, etc. So how did you put all of this together into this insiderness you were mentioning?
Whew, difficult question, Professor Peña. Yeah, definitely. I position myself as an insider in the dissertation, and I acknowledge that this somehow places me in a double bind, because so I am both a subject, but at the same time, I am, you know, I was the researcher, and but there's a duality there that I took as an advantage, because, for example, being an alumnus and also being a current a current teacher of the program, I think that this afforded me with some privileged insights that I would not have if I were an outsider, So it's kind of like, um, yeah, I had access to some tacit knowledge, and because we are talking about curriculum, I had access to that, let's say, occult curriculum, the hidden curriculum, that I had also access to shared stories, to informal practices that we have in the team, that that might they might remain invisible if I were an outsider. So that would be an advantage. But it is true that this familiarity with the context, would risk some of the practices. And at some point you mentioned, in one of your questions, about how my loyalty to the program would shape some of my approaches and my interpretations. And so one way that I addressed this tension was by employing like several strategies, so that I could observe the phenomenon from different standpoints. So, for example, I think that I did a good job in triangulating data sources. So I had the documents, and with the documents, I knew that I was preserving the institutional insight, that it was not my participants, not me, but that I was actually preserving the voice of the institution. Of course, I took into consideration my participants' voices, but I also kept a journal, like a personal journal, where I would, make that, like, all the catharsis of what I saw in the sessions, what I observed in the classes, and I would reread myself many times, in order to identify those biases. So I would say that, and of course, I would go back to my participants all the time, whenever I had an insight, whenever I had an opinion, to see if I was, if perhaps I was capturing what they did, or what they thought, or what they wanted to say. So yeah, I was in this constant negotiation of identifying the biases, and I think that it makes part of becoming a researcher. I mean, there's going to be some level of, let's say, subjectivity, but I think that's the magic of qualitative research. I mean, those personal subjective insights are also very valuable, and for that, I also chose reflective thematic analysis, because I mean, my reflection had to be there, but I just wanted to polish it and to make it as clean as possible, in comparison to the other data sources. And yes, I would say that being an insider can also be conceived as an intercultural encounter with myself, because, as you put it, it's kind of like you need to negotiate your different facets, or your different roles. So as a colleague, but also as a researcher, as a designer, sometimes as a teacher, because I would lead some of the professional development sessions, sometimes as an evaluator, because I would provide some insights and some feedback on what the participants were constructing. So I think that it was a constant, ongoing negotiation in this. It demanded somehow that I had to engage critically with my embeddedness in the context. So yeah, it is a self intercultural dialogue, you know, and I had to reflect. I have to negotiate. I have sometimes to. It's kind of like an exercise of standing in front of the mirror and self othering, right? And it is questioning yourself in your role as an alumnus, questioning yourself in your role as a designer, questioning yourself in your role as a student, as a PhD student that has to somehow respond with a dissertation also, you know. So yeah, it was a constant negotiation, and it's the identities feel conflicted. Uh, yeah, I learned a lot about interculturality with myself. Absolutely.
Okay, Alex, thank you. Yeah, I could feel the struggle that were in between lines. May I have a probe in here? And what about you as an intercultural individual? Did you have this question into yourself?
Oh yes, I think I have. That's a question that I have every single day. So there are different intercultural challenges even when I am driving to the university, and there is a car. I don't know if Professor and Dr. Liddicoat has seen how the driving culture is in South America, but I mean it can be dangerous, and for me it is an intercultural test every day. What am I gonna say? How am I going to respond to the aggressiveness of other drivers? So yeah, this is a constant question that I ask myself, and along the day, I have many moments in which I have to question how intercultural are you, right? I mean, you talk about this in a theoretical level, but how do you embody this in your everyday actions?
Okay, Alex. Thank you very much. It's very interesting how you just play your different roles, and really, I think I can say this really enriched your intercultural identity while you were, coming there and here as a teacher, as a designer, as an alumnus in the whole dissertation, in the whole research process, and I really enjoyed that. I have another question, and it's about the Ministry of Education and what you were describing at the very beginning of your research. And the idea was to align certain ideas, certain postulates from the Ministry of Education and the policies on intercultural education into the ARKS model. So my point is, how do you think the ARKS model, can actually contribute to the transformation of language policies in Colombia, for example? But not only like contribute to the transformation of policies, but also how can it make classrooms to have an evolution towards intercultural practices, and what risks or advantages do you see here? But I know you said that it's Univalle's culturally bound, and that is a model that was planned for Univalle. But I strongly agree with Anthony that many of the different things you're dealing with, and you and emerge in your research, are transferable, in fact, into as a successful experience into other experiences in the different fields of education in Colombia. So, how do you think this can really help maybe formulate or guide some of language policies in the country? And
hmm
how would it be maybe a clue moment, a clue experience for transforming interculturality, for transforming classrooms and classroom practice?
Yeah, I think that the policy is, as many policies I would say are very vague in what they demand. They just ask from you, but they don't actually tell you how. And so hopefully this dissertation will show someone in the ministry if they ever get to read it or something. Um, but hopefully it will show that when they demand, for example, intercultural curricula at all levels, through this process, they will be able to see that it was not transparent for us at the university level. It was actually difficult, and that we had to gather and study, that we had to negotiate basic concepts, that we had to go through professional learning in order to actually appropriate the policy and do something with it to respond to the policy in our university. If that is so for us at the university level, can you imagine what happens in the schools? I feel that we research interculturality and the intercultural at the university level, but that we don't necessarily cascade this knowledge down to teachers in primary education or in schools. And what I'm trying to get at is that the ministry should see that if we required so much learning and so much scaffolding, then we need to think of teacher development for the basic levels. You know, most of the teachers, and I don't want and I don't want to and I don't want to sound like I am blaming this on the teachers or that I'm talking from a deficit perspective. No, it's just that we are asking too much of the teachers and we are not giving them enough for them to do for them to do it, right? The policy just demands from the teachers, but what we need to give them is some guidance, is some materials, is some experiences. We need to accompany the process. And so if this dissertation shows how difficult it was for us who have had, who have come a long way with research and with scholarship, imagine how much scaffolding could need a teacher from the primary and the high school context. So yeah, this is the way in which I think that my dissertation could inform the needs of professional development that we have at all levels of education if the policy is to be implemented.
Okay. Have you thought about any strategies of trying to, have a very strong campaign or a very strong strategy for divulgating your work so that you can really get it to make it happen?
At the moment, all I'm doing is just like presenting in different venues, and I will be very attentive. Sometimes in some of our venues there are representatives of the ministry. I will make sure that I will go right exactly where they are to present my experience, and hopefully I will be able to talk about these needs and how ministry needs to give more resources and more opportunities to implement the policies. That is not just a matter of issuing the policy and that's it. I mean, we need guidance.
Okay, Alex, thank you. Thank you. I have one more question. And it's about digital tools. Have you thought about the ARKS model implementing or taking advantage of, or maybe being enriched by digital tools or platforms or AI or telecollaboration? Have you thought about the possibility of making this addition to your model, and how would it be? How do you imagine it could be?
Okay, I think that there are a lot of digital resources that already exist. So I think it's not a matter of creating something new, but actually harnessing what already exists. And something that we wanted to do with the professional learning program was that we created the reading hub, like with some of the material that we would share. And this function at the beginning, not so much at the end, perhaps because we didn't have time and because the sessions of the professional learning program moved towards a more hands-on design. But I do think that I can, and this is something that I have planned. I want to create kind of like a bank of materials and a bank of resources that would match the guidelines, because after the class observation, one of my participants in one of the interviews that follow-up interviews that I did after the class observation, one of my participants said, okay, this is clear for me because I participated in the design of the guidelines. But what is going to happen if a new teacher arrives in the university tomorrow? So they didn't make part of the design. How it's the same with the policy. How are they going to implement this? So she said, perhaps if you can make hyperlinks and perhaps hyperlink every guideline with some examples of how that looks like in reality. So I think that that's where technology could come in. I could create like these hyperlinks so that each guideline would send you to material design or ideas for assessment, or how this looked in a different class, or how another teacher made an activity tackling this specific guideline. So I think, yeah, that could be kind of like a good add to the model. And in that sense, it wouldn't be helpful not only for our context, but it could actually be there for everybody, like they would see the guidelines and then they would have like a bunch of materials designed by other professors around the world on how to operationalize that specific element of a given dimension.
All right, Alex. Yes, I think that maybe it's important to think about technology and how could you make it reach more people. The reach of the proposal and the reach of the ARKS model. It would be stronger if you think about some technological resources to make sure.
Thank you.
Just one tiny thing. Have you thought this is possible to apply in other languages? For example, what about other foreign languages or indigenous languages? Have you thought about in other scenarios?
Absolutely, yes. So, for example, and that was one of the great things I found in the observations, and it was these plurilingual practices. So for example, a French teacher would use English documents to scaffold the discussion in class. And there was this other participant, I think it was Sumac, and she would use she would create language. No, she would create a material in Spanish, in English, and in French. I can actually show you if you allow me very quickly. Hold on. So yeah, if you get to see, for example, okay, this is a piece of material. And here you see that the teacher is using an article in Spanish. They're using an article in English and an article in French. The objectives are in Spanish, but some of the questions here are in French. So having these teachers engaging in plurilingual practices made me think of a concept that I heard recently. It was being used by Dr. Raúl Mora, and is the concept of language ecology. In which languages coexist. They are not like perfect compartments, but they actually coexist, and what comes out naturally is actually translanguaging. And so, if we take a look at, for example, the guidelines in the knowledge dimension, the guidelines number 1 and number 5, I guess, they tackle this recognition and this acknowledgement of my languages, respecting my own linguistic diversity, being proud of it, and also acknowledging the linguistic diversity of others. And I think that the model itself can be applied to any language. It's how we harness cultures and languages in plural for the benefit of the curriculum. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alex.
No,
Thank you
thank
very
you, Dr.
much, and thank you for the generosity of answer the questions with such
Thank
detail.
you.
So I think I don't have any more questions. Thank you, Alex, for your time.
Well, we thank Dr. Beatriz Peña-Dix from Universidad de los Andes for your questions and comments. And now we will welcome the program's representative jury member, Dr. María Eugenia Guapacha.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be here in this dissertation and to see Professor Liddicoat and Professor Peña-Dix again. So great to see you. And well, congratulations on this outstanding and thought-provoking dissertation, Alex. I think that you did a great job. It's a high quality piece of academic research and your presentation as well. And like Professors Liddicoat and Peña-Dix, I also think that this is a great contribution to the fields of language teacher education and intercultural competence. And it also aligns with scholarly and policy demands in Colombia and beyond. So I think that you can make a great contribution to the international field. Okay, well, I think, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading your thesis.
Thank you.
In all the examples you provided. Well, I think that Professors Liddicoat and Peña-Dix covered the main aspects of your thesis, so they have left me with no questions to ask. Okay, just kidding. Okay, well, I think that you have covered most of the questions that I asked, but I want to focus on some specific questions. Well, so in your dissertation, you mentioned that teachers have a superficial idea of culture, and sometimes it is an erroneous conception of culture. And sometimes we think about food as a superficial or idea of culture, but when we move abroad, we think that food becomes most of the important aspects of the culture. It's a deep aspect of culture. So could you please tell us give us some examples of superficial and deep aspects of culture, and how can teachers move beyond those superficial aspects?
Yeah, when I said I mentioned there are some erroneous conceptions of culture, and I would say that an erroneous conception of culture is one that is static or monolithic view of culture that equates solely to a nation or to a language. And it's not even an incomplete culture, because if you think that something is incomplete, therefore you are acknowledging that there's still something missing and something to be discovered that you don't know yet. But some people, they made the decision of equating culture with nationality, and they say, I don't want to negotiate this. And I would say that is perhaps not an erroneous conception, but it's an erroneous behavior, because it is restrictive. And so if you have a restrictive definition of culture, and if you don't leave room for that definition to be expanded, then I think that restrictive vision will translate into how you approach the intercultural or the cultural elements in language class, and it'll shape also the visions that future teachers will further in their classes. And so, I also talked about how we should have like a broad conception of culture with some superficial aspects and some more deeper aspects, right? And here, I have an example. I remember something that Dr. Peña said in one of her seminars, and she would say, I prefer to have a class with only superficial aspects of culture than a class where no cultural element is found, okay? Because at least having some superficial aspects such as food or traditions will open the door to take the students toward more in deeper levels. Okay, and so here's what I think that we should work. It's in the expertise in how teachers develop the wit. They have to become witty in taking the opportunities of surface level aspects as an open door to deeper aspects. And so, for example, in the observations, again, there's this participant Acapana. She has a picture. She shows a picture to the students, and so in the picture, it's a picture that she took when she was studying her PhD, and you can see some people with slanting eyes and some people with dark complexion and some other women wearing a hijab, for example, that the Muslim piece of clothing. And so, of course, the students, I mean, like they were discussing superficial aspects such as clothing and skin color and slanting eyes, so they must be Asian, and the first guess is Chinese, right, or Japanese, as if there were not other Asian nationalities. But it was the wit of the teacher that allowed her to take advantage of that discussion and to lead the students into more, into more profound aspects. So, for example, they were discussing about, they must be Asians because they have slanting eyes, so they must speak with this accent, blah, 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 and the students would mock the accent and so on and so forth. And so the teacher said, okay, so can you be expected to speak a language just by your looks? And if someone hears you speaking a language, do they already have a mental image of how you look like? And so teachers started questioning, and discovering deeper levels of culture, and it triggers students questioning their own assumptions, right, and their own stereotypes. Then the teachers started talking about the hijab. They were saying, oh, yeah, she's Muslim and she must be perhaps a person who has been restricted from her freedom. And so the teacher, very wittifully started saying, okay, what about the place of women in our country? So let's make comparisons, but that comparison is just not at the level of what do they do there and what do we do here. That comparison is going to be focused on, okay, the place of women in our society and what are the underlying values. So you see, these are aspects of surface culture that the teacher wittifully introduced and took advantage of to take the students into deeper aspects. So yeah, that's what I was referring to.
Well, thank you, Alex, for this complete answer. Okay, I also, well, in your findings, you also said that in the class observations, teachers mostly focused on the noticing, comparing, and reflecting components. And so they didn't do so much about the interacting component. So why do you think that happened? So why the teachers didn't, they didn't integrate this component into their lessons or interactions? And could you please give us some ideas on how we could integrate the interacting component in our teaching?
Yeah, the thing is that, and this was also a question that I received from Dr. Liddicoat when he first read the dissertation, because he said, okay, you say that the teachers fail to promote the interacting process, and so I had to go back to my data and I had to go back to my reflections to see what was actually happening when I wrote that. And Dr. Liddicoat explained to me that interacting, the process of interacting means two things, So on the one hand, it is acknowledging the consequences of the new learning that I will be using in future encounters, right? But it's also it also refers to sharing some ideas and some interpretations with others. So it can happen at those two levels. So what I could observe was that yes, the students and the teachers were successful in fostering the kind of discussion that takes place in the classroom. So yeah, students would verbalize their interpretations, they would share their ideas, they would also negotiate and perhaps go back and change some of their earlier assumptions, but they would do it in class. However, because the teachers said that they want to foster a critical intercultural approach, and because they were so much interested in connecting with the local realities, what I feel that our next step should be designing the kind of activities or proposing the kind of discussions that will encourage the student to continue this intercultural reflection outside of the classroom. Because in the classroom, I can say what the teacher wants to hear, right? Or at least I will never know if what the student negotiated in the classroom was just because he wanted to sound politically correct. But what I want to encourage my students to do is that they will also take this learning beyond beyond the walls of the classroom. So we should think of some tasks or some exercises that would encourage them to interact with diversity outside of the classroom. That's what I didn't get to see very much, perhaps because it is very early, because I only observed 7 of the participants, not the complete group, and perhaps because this is only the first semester. Things would change if I continue observing, perhaps. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and this is the last question.
Yeah.
Well, I also noticed that you moved from a professional development approach to a professional learning approach, implementing the ICC component into the curriculum. Could you please tell us about the strengths and the aspects to improve about your professional learning proposal? And what are the next steps after this implementation?
Yeah, well, yeah, I chose professional learning because I came across this construct thanks to you. You actually introduced me into this vision of professional learning, and then I read some papers by very recent papers by Professor Liddicoat, also talking about professional learning. And when I started reading about it, I realized that it is a form of professional development, but usually professional development has this vertical idea of someone who is leading a group. And the group is very heterogeneous. So it might be people coming from different levels or from different institutions. Whereas in professional learning, what we have is a group of people that belong to the same community, and they do things together in favor of a student body, of a curriculum that they have in common, but also that the sessions are led by, it's more democratic. So there's not the figure of an expert, but there's actually many people contributing to the learning of the whole group, and making contributions from their own expertise. And so I found it like more suitable for the kind of context that we have and for what I wanted to do. That's why I chose professional learning. Now, how would I improve? And I think that we definitely need to go back again to the results, and I have to take the results back to my participants so that they made the decision of, okay, now that we have this, where should we focus? Because something that it's nice about professional learning, it's that it allows for research process. So if we conduct a cycle, then we can go back and make refinements and perhaps make new agreements on what do we need to study next. And so this is what I want to do. And another thing that I would do differently in a professional learning, in another cycle of professional learning, is that I would address some of the limitations of my studies. So, for example, I would observe more participants in action. So I only got to observe 7 of the 22 participants, but I would observe more, and I would observe perhaps during more time, not one semester, but perhaps a little more, to make some longitudinal studies. Or yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, and congratulations to you and to
Thank you, Dr.
your
Guapacha.
supervisor, José Aldemar.
Thank you, Doctor.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. María Eugenia Guapacha, for your comments and questions. We will now open a breakout room so that the jury members may discuss Alexander's performance and reach a decision. We will return approximately in 10-15 minutes to this room. And in the meantime, I invite the audience to share comments or ask questions to Alexander. All right. Well, we are now back with the members of the jury with a great news, I guess. So I am pleased to announce that after evaluating Alexander Ramírez's performance and his ability to respond to the jury's questions, it has been decided that this dissertation has been approved.
Thank you so much.
But not only approved, but also the 3 members of the jury recommend a distinction, and the distinction is the highest laureate.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. I feel very humbled, and I thank the 3 members of my committee. Thank you so much, because your visions and your suggestions improve the quality of the final results. Thank you so much. You have been so generous.
Okay, so we will listen now to Dr. María Eugenia Guapacha's comments on this dissertation in general. As part of the jury, she will give just some comments in general about the dissertation, what they discussed now.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, Alex. Yeah, we agree that this is a very high quality dissertation, and your presentation was very complete, very thorough. And the quality can be seen in the literature review, which was current, very critical. The methodology and the design was very clear and aligned with the theory and the results. So it was, we all agree that it's a very high quality thesis, and it has a great impact and contribution to the field. And you also had some publications and presentations. So we were amazed that you were able to do all these things, like doing research, presenting, publishing, getting awards. So yeah, we are very happy to give you this award, which is the highest score with 5. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and also I will add that the jury also recommends to publish your work.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll invite now Dr. José Aldemar Álvarez to take the floor for 2 minutes. That's the dissertation advisor.
Okay, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the members of the committee for their constant feedback and very enriching comments to the work. I think all of that contributed to this final successful product. I think it's been an honor to accompany Alexander in his academic journey. I think that what stands out throughout the process is his discipline, rigor, and also the seriousness with which he approached each stage of the research. He consistently demonstrated that he was very committed and he was always engaging critically with theory and practice, looking for coherence and particularly depth in his work. But, you know, beyond recognizing his personal qualities, I also want to highlight the contribution this dissertation makes to our program, right? I think this study enriches all of the conversations we've had during the last years, and it has important contributions to the curriculum. So this idea of articulating the intercultural dimension in a more organic and integrated way, which is one challenge of teacher education programs. So I think in that regard, this dissertation contributes a lot to our program, but as members of the committee said, to academia in general, and the field of language education. So it's in brief, I would say this is an individual achievement, very important for Alex. I want to congratulate him on this very important achievement, but also an important achievement for our program, because I know that from this step, we will continue to build more and enrich our program. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you to Doctors María Eugenia Guapacha, Beatriz Peña-Dix, Anthony Liddicoat, and José Aldemar, Álvarez, Valencia, and of course, Alex, for his wonderful work. I would also like to once again thank the audience for attending this event